Hi there, so this is the last video for Unit 2, and I had one more slide to cover, but it's really important because this is the outline of how we do social science research and also research in the fashion industry. So I've narrowed it down to 4 areas. We start with identifying the problem, then we move to collecting data, and then we sample, and then once we have all of that done, then we can analyze the data and make a decision. So it's not as simple as that. So I need you to listen and take notes or remember, because this is going to be really important for the assignment in this unit. So part 1 is identifying the problem. And I want you to think back to English class or another one of your classes in high school, and I want you to think about whether you've had to complete an independent study. So that's when you're doing a project on your own without basically teacher guidance. A lot of the times it's for like a summative. And a lot of the times when you do an independent study or you do a lab, you need to develop a research problem. So the first step in the research project is defining the problem and articulating it. So the more specific and focused the problem, the more relevant and reliable the data that will be when you collect it. This is the most difficult part of the research process. A lot of the time it involves a lot of reading and discussion before the question is considered. So, for example, a designer might wish to expand and consider future manufacturing potential by starting another line. So one of the research questions they might consider is, how large is the market for larger sized women's leisure wear? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question might be something as simple as, is the timing appropriate to enter such a market? Or would it be better 5, 6, 7 years down the line? So once a designer has defined their research problem and it's focused, then the project can proceed to the next step. So next we move to data collection. Data is probably going to be gathered from 2 possible sources. Secondary sources are usually examined first because this method is the most cost effective. So where we would get secondary data is from company records and archives. So maybe looking at sales reports or product returns. You might get something from StatsCan or other government agencies. You might get information from trade associations. In Canada, we have the Canadian Apparel Association that collects data. And we might get secondary sources from periodicals or journals. So there's a Canadian trade publication called Style, and there's an American trade publication called Women's Wear Daily. So once the secondary data is collected, generally then designers would move on to primary data collection. If they got enough secondary data, then they might skip the primary data step. And primary data is collected through original research. So either the designer would conduct this themselves, or more likely they would hire someone out to conduct this research. And this is largely done through surveys or questionnaires or observation or focus groups. So the method chosen will depend on the research problem as well as the availability of time and money. So let's talk about questionnaires, because that's one thing that you're going to be doing. So you get the information from a questionnaire via maybe a personal interview, maybe a phone interview, maybe by mail, or perhaps by the internet for things like SurveyMonkey or a Google form. And the method used is dependent on the market size and location and how quickly a response is required. So if you have lots of time, you can do personal interviews or telephone interviews, or even wait for mail interviews. But if you don't have a ton of time, then maybe an electronic option is better. When you're developing a questionnaire, the following must be considered. So the length of the form should be brief. People aren't going to do your survey if it takes them longer than 5 minutes to complete it. So a lot of multiple choice, maybe a couple short answer questions, but definitely nothing that requires a lot of writing. Appropriate language must be used. It's got to look and sound professional because it's for a professional purpose and people are sharing their information with you. So you want to avoid slang, but you also want to use technical language that the normal everyday person wouldn't use or understand. The question should contain a single idea. So never ask 2 questions together. So, what is your favorite style of garment? And you've got a list of, and why do you like that garment? If you put the data together, it's going to be really hard to extrapolate one idea or the other. So you want to just have 2 questions. When you're developing questions, you should generally have questions that are a little bit more robust. You don't want just yes or no. This is when we see strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. Knowing where they fall on the line is a lot more useful for you. And you should always include demographic questions. So, is this person male or female? How old is this person? What socioeconomic group do they belong to? This allows you to play with your data in a very interesting way. So you always want to include demographic questions. When looking at a questionnaire, some questions might include, what's your combined family income? What's your occupation? What's your family status? So like single, newlywed, married with older children. What stores do you purchase most of your apparel? And then you could list possible stores. What percentage of your clothes are designer labels? And then having different options like 0 to 10%, 10 to 25%, and go from there. You could also ask them their opinion on things. So, would you consider purchasing private labels from Winners? And name your store. Or you could even ask them, do some market research on names that you're thinking of. So could you suggest a name for a new teen private label? So you are focusing in on something that you are interested in. So we talked about questionnaires. The other 2 things that I just want to touch on are focus groups and observation. Focus groups is when you have a panel of people, usually about 10 to 15, and you collect data that way. This method is pretty popular because it provides reliable results, and the focus group will evaluate different ideas, such as promotions or customer service, and their responses are recorded. And this gives the ability for the person to play it back and talk about that. And then the last one is observation. Observation is when we look at what's actually happening. So, there's a fashion section of the industry publication Style that often reports on who wore what to a major event. So reporters for publications, as well as television reporters, will attend events attended by individuals who wear very high fashion merchandise and use the observation method to report their assessment on what's being worn. So, data collection. Looks small on the slide, but it's actually quite complicated, and that is the bulk of the fashion research that's being done there. So third, we have sampling. Sampling is when you determine the number of responses you require in your sample and the sampling technique you'll employ. So it's essential that the sample be selected from the market group that you're studying. So one of the things that we can do is area sampling. This includes sampling that restricts data from being collected from certain establishments within the boundary. So maybe you don't want to collect Toronto, but you want to collect Ontario data. So you can collect data based on an area. Non-random sampling is when the sample is restricted. So you might wish to collect data from stores who sell merchandise at a price point greater than $800. And random sampling is where you just give every, if you designed a collection that you wish to be sold in a store, in stores across the country, you would develop a list of all the possible stores and survey a small percentage of those stores about your ideas. So, sampling is kind of like data collection, but with the focus in on retail stores and the area of which you potentially would want to sell. Last but not least is data analysis. Once all the data has been collected, it's analyzed, summarized, and conclusions are drawn. It's really important to do this because it's going to determine the direction of the manufacturer or the producer or the retailer. And there are going to be really costly business decisions made based off of the analysis of this data. So a report's usually written that outlines all the stages of the study and all the possible options. When we analyze data, we generally use charts, graphs, and other supporting materials, like an example of the questionnaire. So I hope that you can see the power that you have as the consumer. It's the consumer that has the ability to make one business successful and another fail. When the consumer spends, all the fashion industry segments move and grow at a healthy, profitable momentum. But if consumer spending slows down, the whole industry slows down and must regroup. The reign of the image designer in the 1980s resulted in customers viewing fashion as vitality. The 90s were hallmarked by fashion as a form which reveals inner beauty. So now, environmental issues are becoming a driving force behind this industry. We're going to talk more about this in Unit 3, 4, and 5. Customers have the power to make radical changes in this industry, but most fail to realize this power. As a consumer, what statement do you want to make? What direction do you want to see this industry move? Even if you're not going to work in the fashion industry, you are going to be a fashion consumer. So don't underestimate your power. I think that you're ready now to look at the assignment page. This assignment is one of my favorites because it is most like an assignment that you would do next year in post-secondary. I've had lots of students come back and be like, Miss, I'm really glad we did that inquiry assignment because I had to do something similar in my first year class. And that one, doing it beforehand, really helped me out. So I want you to play with this. If you don't totally get it, it's okay. I can help you. But this is our chance to play with these ideas because this is what's done in the real world. All right, so take a look and let me know if you have any questions.